Hey, greetings there, everybody. It is Gleekon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On the last episode of Lore of Warcraft, we read the 17th chapter of Sylvanas, and we saw the Forsaken join the Horde. So that's a big moment, something that I was waiting for to find out how exactly that happened, and it wasn't that. There's not a ton behind it, basically. The Alliance didn't even give them the opportunity to join, so there's no real big story there. And then they spied and reached out to the Tauren, who they felt were the most open-minded, and it worked. They met up with Thrall, and Sylvanas just kind of subsumed. She does have this festering resentment, but it's more almost for the way they are. The fact that she doesn't feel like anyone should, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, Condescend to take in their race. Like, she should, no one's doing her a favor. So there's that part, but she really quickly gets over the fact that the Horde caused the murder of her entire family. Maybe that's due to that soul thing. I don't know. Lack of a soul. All right, so stay a while and listen as we continue this story. We are obviously past Warcraft 3 material, but not that far past it. Here we go with Chapter 18 of Sylvanas. Fate does love a twist, Sylvanas said, almost purring as she listened to the latest report from her spies. It had not been so long ago, only a handful of years, that Sylvanas had returned to her homeland, still awkward in her new body, full of foolish hope that somehow her old friends could see past what she had endured to the Sylvanas they remembered. She had gone to them for aid, although they were unaware, and they had equally unwittingly refused. So now we've passed forward a few years. So we're definitely in the future now, maybe even in World of Warcraft territory. I guess we'll see. Her former people had not fared well in the intervening time. By the start of the Third War, their late king Anasterion had somewhat distanced his kingdom from the Alliance. Later, Kael'thas, smarting from abusive treatment and imprisonment at the hands of one particularly abhorrent human, Garithos, whom Sylvanas had used for her own ends before ordering his death, had renounced any union between the Alliance and the Quel'Drai. The Blood Elves, as Kael had named them, were barely recovering from what Arthas had done to them, to the Sunwell, and to their entire world of beauty and grace. Okay, so Kael'thas is back, I guess? Or no, they're not necessarily saying that, but we are getting a little spoiler right there that something probably within Warcraft 3 is going to happen with Garithos. Maybe he's going to get possessed by Sylvanas. I'm not sure. A thought found its way to her, something she had told Nathanos once a lifetime ago, that she fought to keep her people from having to see the ugliness that was out there in the world. Well, now they had seen ugliness and horror aplenty, and they were alone. Because they had turned their back on the Alliance, they now had enemies on virtually the entire continent. She had hidden her pride, though not swallowed it, to approach the Forest Riders. Approach the Forest Riders, Alliance, and Horde. While not feeling any particular kinship to the Horde, she was glad for a place that, albeit grudgingly, welcomed her people. They were all simply arrows to Sylvanas, arrows with which to bring down the hated foe in Northrend. But what hunter did not leap at the chance to procure more arrows? Anasterion had been universally loved, and that love had been well earned. Like Sylvanas, he had died standing in the way of Arthas Menethil, though Arthas had allowed the king to lie where he fell. The prince had not been so benevolent with Anasterian's ranger general. I wonder if this is going to be this story of how the Blood Elves are partially taken into the Horde, which would put us actually in the pre-Burning Crusade time. And where had Kael'thas been? Idling in Dalaran, wearing purple robes and protected by his books and magic, while Sylvanas and her rangers fell, and his people were reduced to death and decay. He had not been welcomed with open arms either, so her spies had said, though he did try to lead. She had heard that Kael had refused to accept the mantle as king. Anasterion was king, not he. Kael'thas had said so at his father's service. He made a vow to Anasterion's long-fled spirit that there would never be another Quel'Drai king. Now Kael'thas was gone again, this time from the very face of Azeroth. He had gone through the dark portal as Illyria had and was searching for a way to cure his people's addiction to magic, a particularly cruel result of the Sunwell's contamination. Alright, well, that's actually currently still going on in Warcraft 3. So many repercussions from the arrogance and weakness of a single mortal man. Sylvanas wondered where the shockwaves would finally stop, if indeed they ever would. She suspected not. Some things changed the world for good or ill, and those that did not change with them did not survive. Without aid, those she had once called her people would perish, picked off by the lumbering scourge or emboldened trolls, or something less dramatic, such as famine or disease. They had already been reduced to siphoning energy off the Naru, the mysterious crystalline creatures who were of the light in some way she did not yet understand. The rest would succumb eventually. Yeah, so now we're getting into this pre-Burning Crusade time. Unless she helped them. Bring me pen and parchment, Sylvanas ordered one of her guards. Unto Lorthamar Throne, Regent Lord of Quel'Thalas, Lady Sylvanas Windrunner of the Forsaken, sends greetings. You may believe me when I say you and those you lead have my deepest sympathies for what was done by Arthas Menethil to the kingdom of Quel'Thalas. I was among those casualties, as were far too many others, but as I have adapted and changed, taking command of my own destiny and shepherding the Forsaken to a rightful place in this new world, I know the Quel'Darai can as well. The Scourge continue to erode the once beautiful land and attack its people. Our old enemies, the Amani, have taken advantage of your weakened state. You are nothing if not a practical strategist, Lorthamar, and I know you understand that your kingdom will truly be erased and your people extinct if you cannot push back your twin adversaries. I also understand that you harbor a deep reluctance when it comes to accepting the undead as allies. I assure you, the Forsaken are not the Scourge. Arthas's monsters are animated corpses, nothing less and nothing more. We are people like you, with our own minds and goals and dreams. Allow us to prove this to you. If you are reading this, hopefully you have not executed my envoys on sight as I believe King Varian did. Please give them safe passage with your reply, whatever it may be. I offer you, my former right hand, this. I will send some of my finest Forsaken fighters to assist you in driving back the Scourge from the gates of Silvermoon. I am certain you will find them impressive. If you still feel you cannot trust me, trust the hatred I and every Forsaken harbor for Arthas and the Scourge. No one loathes them as the Forsaken do, which you will see. I await your response. She signed it simply Sylvanas, scrawled boldly in black ink. It felt right. As she watched the envoys bow and depart the royal chambers, Sylvanas frowned. Something wrong, my lady? Eramathras inquired. No, Sylvanas lied, merely calculating the odds on my subjects returning with their heads attached. There was indeed something wrong, but she would never admit it to her demonic servant. Part of her was anxious, not about the envoys, but about how the letter would be received. Would Lorthamar tear it up? Refuse? Send a scathing letter of reproach for what she did at the gates of Quel'Thalas? Why did it matter? This should be nothing to her. They and their once too pretty world should be nothing to her. The only thing that should be troubling her was if they would agree so that when the time was right, she could use them in the final battle to bring Arthas to his knees, so she could strike the killing blow. Instead, unbidden thoughts came into her mind, images of hunts and battles, of blades clashing and arrows singing, of laughter and meals and sleeping under the night sky, hearing the rhythmic breathing of friends on either side of her. She no longer breathed, and they were no longer friends. A dull ache settled on her chest as if something heavy lay there. Fetch Putris, Sylvanas ordered. I would have him update me on the status of the Blight. Surely that would be sufficient distraction. Sylvanas would focus on anticipating each step in bringing down the enemy and forget that once she'd needed friends and had them. Sylvanas had been prepared to wait weeks for a response, but it came in less than a fortnight. Lady Sylvanas, I am in receipt of your missive and shall ease your mind by informing you your envoys are being well treated. We are grateful for your generous offer, and I am yet more grateful to learn that you have liberated yourself and other victims of the Lich King's cruelty from his control. It is no small comfort to learn that one who had led us so well and courageously had not willingly performed such atrocities. We had heard rumors that you were no longer with Arthas, but I believe you can understand that we mistrusted this word after what we had witnessed firsthand in Silvermoon. Know that I and many others who have been forced to shoulder the mantle of day-to-day leadership since the death of our king and the absence of our prince do understand that your Forsaken are in your own way as much victims of Menethil's atrocities as we are. I hope that in the very near future I shall be able to report that your soldiers and ours have succeeded in driving the scourge out of Quel'Thalas due to working alongside each other for the greater good of all. Lorthamar Theron, Regent Lord of Quel'Thalas. So we're seeing a couple things here. We're definitely flashed forward because now we are seeing the Blood Elves essentially joining the Horde. Maybe not full on yet, but this is all a line connecting those events. And also, we're seeing Varamathras in his place still by Sylvanas' side, as it is in classic World of Warcraft. Thrall sat on his throne in Orgrimmar, resting his chin on one hand as he listened, blue eyes narrowed in concentration. Between the trolls and the scourge, Quel'Thalas faces multiple challenges if it is to survive, Sylvanas said. While I have others who depend on me now, I can attest Quel'Darai's skills, weaponry, and knowledge of magic can benefit the Horde greatly. They must have aid or they will perish. The Horde has come to the Forsaken's aid in response to your request, Thrall said at last. Your people have proven useful to the Horde, and I'm happy to reward that service. It seems odd to me that you would ask for this, though, a favor to those for whom you clearly had little love. You were more than ready to take the Forsaken to them before turning to the Horde. That is true, she said, and who could blame me for hoping? I once was one of them, but the Alliance has better things to do, it would seem, than try to rekindle relationships with a race that has rebuffed them. But you do not, the war chief persisted, leaning forward. You are not known for having a soft heart, Sylvanas. Why them? There were several reasons for her actions, the main one being strengthening her position in the Horde by bringing them another useful ally. But there were other reasons too, feelings that she couldn't quite access, but that bound her to her former people nonetheless. War Chief, she said, when Arthas invaded Quel'Thalas, not only did he nearly slaughter indiscriminately, but he took from those who remained their best hope for recovery, the Sunwell. It nourished and protected the Quel'Darai for millennia. They became dependent on it without even realizing it. When this magical source of energy was first befouled and later destroyed, they experienced and continue to experience severe withdrawal. Thrall's strong brow furrowed. He nodded quietly. Such a grim situation was familiar to him. Sylvanas pressed the point. Where would the orcs be had you not escaped your enslavement and liberated the encampments, reminded them of who they were and the glory they would be capable of? The Quel'Darai need someone to aid them and believe in them as well. You believe in them? He asked quietly, and she knew that though Thrall's heart was great and surprisingly kind for one with so much power, he was laying a trap for her. Unexpectedly she heard in her head her father's last words. Believe in yourself, dear girl, as I have always believed in you. She spoke a partial truth. Everyone needs someone who believes in them. I believe that once their pride is restored to them, they will repay the Horde's investment 1,000-fold. They will rise to the level you think them capable of. And so, War Chief, I believe it is best for all involved, including the Horde, to think them capable of the greatest feat you can imagine. They will not disappoint. She thought of Rawmath's skills, of Lorthamar and Haldoran and the Forest Riders, of the craftsmanship of the Quel'Darai artisans and their passion in whatever they turned their hand to, and allowed herself a smile. When she spoke again, it was with the complete truth. They will not disappoint you at all. Lorthamar Theron, however, was not as easy to convince as Thrall had been regarding the mutual benefits of the elves joining the Horde. Thrall's letter, which had a few conditions attached to it, was politely but firmly rejected. Sylvanas' request was received no better. While they were grateful for her aid, Lorthamar said, the Horde had done too much harm for the elves to see them as allies. Sylvanas let time do what persistence could not. After a few more months, Lorthamar agreed to allow a small group of Horde representatives to enter Silvermoon. They were permitted an audience with the Regent Lord, but no promises were made. Still, she waited. The hour was not dire, at least not yet. Putris was making progress, growing more arrogant and self-centered with every successful experiment, but he was a long way from making something that was usable. The Lich King was not stirring, and so the Dark Lady cultivated patience. Finally, an emissary was sent to Thrall. Lorthamar had agreed to Thrall's conditions, but the Regent Lord had a few of his own. One such was that they meet in Quel'Thalas, not Orgrimmar. Another stipulated the maximum number of attendees from any race. And so it was that Sylvanas Windrunner found herself astride a skeletal steed, one of the few beasts that would consent to bear her, standing at the entrance to the land of her birth. The last time she had been here, her body was so clumsy, yet she had made it all the way from Deathholm to the Farstrider retreat, only to be met with disappointment bitter as gall. Before that, she had murdered so many here merely with her voice. Now she would use that voice to bring them to the table. She, Thrall, Cairn, and Vol'jin of the Darkspear Trolls rode through the arching gates. Once resplendent in their white and gold and red glory, the great gates now looked as sad and dark as the surrounding gloom. There was despair on either side of the gate now. Eversong had become the Ghostlands, and verdant farmlands were turned to plague lands. A group of Farstriders had gathered to escort them the rest of the way to the Enclave. Sylvanas recognized none of them save one.
Alderon Brightwing, Thrall said. I am Thrall, War Chief of the Horde. This is the Tauren High Chieftain Cairn Bloodhoof, and...
We've met, Sylvanas said. I trust you are well, Ranger General. I mean, this is, I guess, cool that they're getting the Blood Elves, but when you know the story like this, it requires so much of a suspension of belief to imagine that any elves could ever join the Horde. It's a lot. It's a tough sell. Especially the Blood Elves. Maybe the Night Elves. That would have been an easier narrative to weave. I am, he said. His dark blonde hair was still unkempt, and as ever she wondered that it didn't get in his eyes, but his voice was deeper, cautious, and his visage so stern that Sylvanas found it hard to believe he had once laughed at the slightest provocation. How many dark days has it been, my old friend, she thought, since any of us has truly laughed?
Please follow me,
Alderon said, turning his gaze to Thrall, Vol'jin, and Cairn.
Your retinue will wait here. We will tend to their needs during the proceedings.
Cairn narrowed his eyes, seemingly unhappy with the announcement. Thrall started to speak, but Sylvanas interrupted him. Alderon is honorable, she said, tactfully withholding the memories where he had not been above duplicity if it would win the battle. Alderon's head whipped around. Some of the guardedness fell from his face, and Sylvanas saw in the familiar features surprise, sorrow, and repugnance. If Lorthamar Theron wanted us dead, she continued, we would be so, and never even know what had felled us. There is no ambush lying in wait, High Chieftain. Cairn grunted and inclined his head. It was a gesture of respect among the Tauren, but it always looked to Sylvanas as if the old bull was about to charge.
I know it be hard for the elves to trust in a troll, Vol'jin said. For my part, I and my people be taking no offence.
Alderon's brow knit. Sylvanas knew him so well she could almost read his mind. He who had captured the dreadful Zul'jin only to lose him was analyzing Vol'jin as he had analyzed her, weighing the benefits of trust.
Trust is indeed earned, not given, he said to Vol'jin. But many things have changed, most for the worst, but perhaps some for the better.
They followed the new Ranger General along the Thalassian Way, a route Sylvanas could have walked in her sleep, had she still slept. Everything was at once so familiar and yet so strange. In recent years she had become unused to dappled sunlight filtered through gold leaves, to birdsong and the smell of green living things. We named you for the beautiful woods of our homeland. Farstrider Enclave, once the southernmost home of Farstriders stationed to patrol the area, was now almost deserted. Its open-air design and winding walkways made the place feel enormous and looming, but the fire in the center blazed as it always had, and Sylvanas felt an odd sense of comfort. She glanced out at Lake Elrondar, remembering the bright blue mirror reflecting the cloudless skies. Now it looked murky and sick like the rest of the land, and Sylvanas felt an odd pang. Lorthamar, Jiri, and Celissa awaited them. Compared with Lorthamar's patrician composure, Haldron appeared a lively chatterbox. The Ron spoke with perfect courtesy, but as if to a stranger, formal, polite, and distant. His demeanor set the tone for the negotiations. Having brought Thrall and Lorthamar to the table, Sylvanas had little interest in the particulars, and listened with only half an ear to the conversation, chiming in when necessary and retreating into herself when not. Thoughts came and went like clouds on one of the afternoons when she and her 3 siblings would lie on the soft grass, pointing out shapes in the puffy whiteness, finding significance in nothing at all. Was this the nature of things in the end? That one was born and then one died, and one needed to find meaning in the journey? Were they nothing without some sense of purpose? The thoughts disturbed her. She had a purpose, clear and simple, and fulfilling that purpose was meaning enough. Food was brought and consumed by those whose bodies still needed nourishment. Sylvanas noticed the spring paw appetizers, and her mind went back to that day that seemed like centuries ago, when Illyria had been running flat out and the Mauler was close behind. How young they had been. But there was another memory, too, specifically regarding the delicacy itself. Someone had been very fond of it. Yeah, and it's interesting because this book was written so much later. All of the things in the Blood Elf starting zone that she ties in almost in a retcon fashion. I don't think there's that much lore behind it, but she's adding a richness of lore. So I think when we go back and play that, it will be fun because we will now have all these stories attached to the items and the locations, but they weren't there at the time. Out south, Thrill, she said suddenly. Lorthamar stopped mid-chew and looked at her sharply. What about him? Eldaron asked. Did he survive? He did, Lorthamar said. Not even Arthas Menethil can halt his parties for long. He still holds forth pouring and drinking, sun-touched with reckless abandon. I wonder if that is his way of clinging to sanity, or perhaps avoiding it. Well, Sylvanas said, I suppose it is good that some things never change. For a moment, just a moment, a tiny splinter of time, there was warmth among the 3 of them. Shared memories of music, wine, and soft summer days, sweet as spun sugar and as fragile. Then the moment was gone, and it did not come again. The negotiations did not take long. Everyone knew that the biggest hurdle, that of the Blood Elves agreeing to even speak with the Horde representatives, had already been cleared. The rest were details. Parchments were brought, signatures and seals were affixed, and it was done. The formalities continued, though. Lorthamar politely offered the war chief and all who had accompanied him lodging in Silverman for the evening. Thrall declined with equal courtesy, yet agreed to a tour of the famed city. As he and Karen rose and began to walk to their waiting mounts, though, Sylvanas paused, then turned to Lorthamar. Tell me, Regent Lord, she said, you now call this place the Ghostlands. Yes, he said, adding, for the dead now outnumber the living. He was clearly trying to keep a hard edge out of his voice. He failed. Sylvanas only nodded. Since I have come all this way, I would like to see my home again. I hope you have no objection. Even if he did object, he could not say no, not when he had just agreed to join the Horde, with her as a leader of one of those Horde races, just as the Blood Elves were now. Of course not, Lady Sylvanas. I trust you do not need an escort. I know the way. Yeah, so it seems like the rest of this part, what's actually going to be happening is us getting just a quick recap of important beats leading up to the beginning. So probably taking us all the way up to Wrath of the Lich King. So this is, we could pause and every expansion read a chapter in this novel, but we'll just go ahead and finish this whole part out, even though it is going to be spoiling some things. It's just more convenient this way. I don't want to forget these chapters later on, and it's not that big a deal. We'll as we get to these beats again in the future parts, we'll reference back what we've learned already. Okay, we got another episode in the pipe, 5x5. Thank you all so much for watching and for listening, and I'll see you next time on Lore of Warcraft.